Hi everybody, Rochelle here from Quebec Cichlids. Today I will be talking to you about substrate, more specifically how to choose the right substrate for your aquarium. Choosing the right substrate is an often overlooked step when we're starting a new aquarium. It's about more than just choosing the right rocks that fit with your living room decor. Substrate is actually way more than just pretty rocks. It contributes to your water parameters, making them adequate for your aquarium. Choosing the wrong substrate can lead to problems with the inhabitants of your aquarium, let them be fish, plants, or invertebrates. A common mistake is to put the substrate in before having chosen the type of aquarium you want. If you ever notice that the water from your tap tastes different than the water from the tap of your friend's house in a different city, it's exactly the same concept but on a larger scale. There are fish and plants around the globe and they all live in different kinds of water. So if we want to recreate these complex and diverse ecosystem, we need the right substrate, amongst other things. Community fish and small American cichlids. Okay, so I'm starting off with the easiest one. If you plan on making a community tank with tetras, barbs, and the normal fish, as some people call them, or if you want to add small American cichlids such as rams, apistogramma, or angels, get pretty much the substrate you want. Obviously, in American cichlids, certain prefer a different grain than others. You will have to Google what kind of substrate your cichlids prefer. As for everything else, as long as the substrate does not affect the pH or the KH, meaning that it doesn't bring it up, it's rare that they will bring it down, but if it doesn't bring it up, that's perfect. Those that raise the pH and the KH are usually identified for cichlid tanks, or African cichlid tanks, or the reef aquarium. So just steer clear of those. Now, even though you choose the right substrate for your aquarium, this is usually the first step that you're gonna do because you bought the aquarium and now you're buying the substrate usually at the same time as your aquarium. Before deciding to take these fish, you are gonna have to check that your water parameters from the tap are adequate for the fish. If the GH, the KH, or the pH are too high, you will have trouble keeping these fish, regardless of the substrate that you choose. If this is the case, don't fret, just look into African cichlids and you'll be fine. To understand more about the water parameters and what they mean, I have another video on my channel that I will link in the description, and it really explains all these parameters that I just mentioned. Don't get too intimidated, it's not as complicated as it sounds. If you want to add with these community fish and American cichlids, if you want to add some plants, namely the water column feeding plants, as we call them, like Anubias, Java fern, plants that will absorb the minerals that are in the water, use any substrate. The substrate doesn't affect these plants. So you can pick the one you like and the one that your cichlids like as well, don't forget. If you want other plants that are a little more complex, stay tuned and I will explain that later on in the video. Rift Lake African cichlids. The African cichlids from lakes Malawi, Tanganyika, and Victoria have specific water parameters that they need that can be replicated pretty easily with the right substrate and a couple products from your local fish store. With Rift Lake cichlids, we need to use pH and KH augmenting substrate. You can use those that are marked for African cichlids as well as those that are marked for the reef aquarium. My two personal favorites are one of each. I really like the Carib Sea Sahara sand, which is black and white, it's a fine grain, and the Carib Sea aragonite, which is mainly for reef tanks, but it is perfect for the African cichlid tank. For African cichlids from the three Great Lakes, we have to keep our pH at 8.2 and our KH above 240 ppm. We cannot attain these water parameters unless we're really lucky with our water supply, just by using products. The substrate will help the buffer stabilize these water parameters. Most people keeping African cichlids who don't use this substrate usually have problems maintaining a high pH. Basically what happens is that their water has a too low KH, the carbonate hardness. This parameter affects the pH. The higher it is, the less your pH will vary. So when you put your water in, the pH will raise, Because you put buffer in it. And over the week, the buffer effect, it will run out and the pH will go down. And then after the week is over, your pH went from 8.2 to 7.5. You make a water change, add some products, and it raises back to 8.2. All this variation can be deadly for your fish. It's extremely stressful for them. It will weaken your fish and make them more prone to disease and infection. Even though the substrates for African cichlids and reef do help you maintain healthy water parameters, the products that you use during your water change will complement these substrates. You can't have one without the other. I explained earlier why if you don't have the substrate, the products don't work. Well, if you have only the substrate and you don't use any products, your pH might cap at 7.8. You won't be able to bring it to the appropriate 8.2. Despite all this, the more rocks you have, coral rocks, coral substrate, all that stuff, the more you have, the easier it will be to maintain the pH and the GH and the KH, and you will be using less products. Of course, keep in mind that every tap is different and your results may vary. If you're hesitating between fine and coarse substrate, keep in mind that finer substrate is easier to keep clean. Basically, all the waste will stay on top and will not go into the cracks. This being said, avoid extremely fine substrate because as cichlids are excavators, they will throw that substrate into your filter and it will break the impeller. There are substrate feeding and substrate dwelling cichlids such as the Xenotilapia who absolutely need a finer sand. Substrate spawning cichlids from Lake Tanganyika will also prefer the finer grain. As I said with the community fish, research your fish before adding them into the aquarium and before obviously adding the substrate to make sure to give them the optimal environment. If you want to add these fish that need special grained substrate and with water parameters, usually a quick research with Google should help you find the appropriate substrate for your fish. Big predator fish and big American cichlids. If you're into big, giant predator fish, get big grain substrate. If it's too fine, every time they take off, the substrate will rise and get eaten up by your filter and break it eventually. Excluding the Rift Lake cichlid predators, I'm not talking about these in this section, talking about the more American predators. Their pH is usually neutral-ish. It really depends on the fish, where it's from. So basically, steer clear of the African cichlid and the reef substrates. Go for more river pebbles and things like that. Planted aquarium. I am not going to go into too much details about the planted tank substrates because every plant has different needs. If you only buy water column feeding plants such as Java fern or Anubias, honestly, this is going to be easy. Get the substrate that is great for your fish, the community fish, or if you have American cichlids, get the one that's perfect for them. They don't feed off the substrate, so there's nothing special that you have to do. For the other plants, most planted tank substrates are perfect. There are so many different brands on the market and most of them offer exactly what you need. If you're buying specific plants that have higher magnesium or potassium needs, you might have to buy a more specific planted tank substrate. For the most part, pretty much anyone will do. There is ADA, Seachem, Fluval makes some as well, a Carib Sea, obviously. So get what's available at your local fish store. Even though certain substrates come already mineralized and they add certain minerals to the water, this does not replace fertilizing. It simply complements it. So really research your plant's needs. I usually go on the Tropica website, which has a lot of great information on there, and there's also a lot of books on the market that you can usually find at your local fish store. I don't think there is a big section at the library. As I mentioned with all the others, every tap is different and results may vary. What works for one person might not work for somebody else who has a different water supply. So keep that in mind. If ever you have the kind of tap where your pH is high and it is extremely mineralized, usually this is the case with well water, you might have trouble keeping more fragile plants. Saltwater aquariums. This is the easiest to shop for. Simply buy some coral substrate. They're usually marked for saltwater tanks. Don't get the African cichlid ones. For African cichlids, they can get the saltwater substrates, but it's not right the other way around. For saltwater tanks, there is also live substrate. This is not only advantageous because it's pre-washed, so you do not have to wash your substrate, it is also packed with live bacteria that helps with the cycling of your aquarium. Even though this one is pre-washed, most substrates are not. So if you buy a dry substrate, make sure to wash it properly. I just posted a video a couple weeks ago about exactly how to wash your substrate, so go check it out after this video. I will put the link right in the video description. Changing the substrate in an active tank. I hope that this video has helped you shed some light on this subject that can sometimes seem so intimidating. It's pretty simple basically. Choose the kind of fish you want and shop for the appropriate substrate afterwards. Don't do it the other way around. It's happened so often that people would come into my store with the wrong substrate and with African cichlids. I am mainly specialized in African cichlids, and it's a big job to change your substrate. You have to take all the fish out, empty the water, but preserve the most water that you can, and take out the substrate and add the new one. Put the water back in, put some bacterial enhancers because there's a lot of bacteria that ends up in our substrate that's beneficial for our cycle. Since we take the substrate out, we lose a lot of that bacteria. So that's if you have to change your substrate. I really hope you watch this video before having chosen your substrate. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and hit that little bell button to get a notification every time I post a new video. I have new content that's being added every week. If you like what I do, you can also follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, and I have a great website where you can shop online and see all the fish I have for sale. I ship throughout Canada. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye!